be here with us. We will be recording this and we'll share this with you either in the next e-blast or maybe we'll even send it out before then. We're grateful that we have a new communications coordinator helping us out with that. So we are very grateful for that. I'm going to get us started with a prayer. I'm using part of a prayer written by writer-author Sarah Bessey. As we acknowledge this one very long year living in this pandemic. So let's pray. God, you hold our memories of this past year in your capable hands. I imagine you're weaving the moments that have shaped us into what will be a beautiful quilt, bringing all of the collective grief and the individual sorrow, the small delights and ordinary goodnesses, the moments we were afraid and angry, alongside of the moments when we felt joy and contentment, all stitched together with your grace for it all. Wrap us up in the warmth of your love, knowing we are held, beloved, worthy just as we are in this moment. May we know you in the silence, in the exhaustion and anger, in the grief and joy, and in our humanity, which you blessed and called good. And we ask for an end to the suffering and for your justice to roll down, your healing to mend us, your love to hold us all, even when we are in pieces. We love you, Lord. Amen.
Amen.
All right. So we are really excited to have our friend and colleague Lisa Allgood with us this afternoon. As we have shared, Lisa is the executive presbyter of the Presbytery of Cincinnati. Has it been 3 years, Lisa?
Yes, amazing.
Time flies.
Yes.
Yeah. Lisa has spent, 36 years in the pharmaceutical industry, and in immunological research and clinical vaccine development, and that you're still connected with that research community.
Yes.
Yeah, wonderful. Anything else you want to say before you just jump in?
No, I'll just jump in. I call myself the accidental presbyter. So this is my third failed retirement. And God's sense of humor. Let's take an ex-immunologist and make her presbyter in the middle of a global pandemic.
Yeah.
But, thank you for being here. If you guys have questions, raise your hand, put them in the chat. I'm happy to answer them as we go or answer them at the end, whatever works for you. So I'm going to go fairly rapid pace because the end of this is, I think, where everybody wants to go. Coronaviruses are not new. There are 8 that humans have encountered over the years. 4 of them cause the common cold. 2 of them have caused I'll call mini pandemics. One was SARS that came out of Singapore in 2004. Not nearly as infectious as this one, but way more highly fatal. The other one was MERS that came out of the Middle East and is really now restricted to the Arabian Peninsula. Neither of those have a vaccine. So COVID is not new. COVID-19 is the one that we're dealing with. It is actually a really wimpy virus in the sense that it is just a sack of fat with those protein spikes on the outside and a single strand of messenger RNA. That's its genetic material. Part of the reason it's wimpy is that 20 seconds of washing with soap is all it takes to disrupt it because of the fat sac. So it's really not a hugely pervasive virus. The problem is it's highly aerosolized, so that it is just everywhere in the air. It's like one of those things you really don't want to see it because it looks like a King Kong kind of movie. The reason we have a vaccine so quickly for this one is because the genetic sequence was actually completed last January. So we've had the genetic sequence literally within a month of us acknowledging that it came into the United States. That plus 20 years of vaccine development technology is what led to this vaccine this fast. So even though it feels fast, in fact, it's built on 20 years of a platform. And so it's really not. COVID-19 is 3 times more infectious than any other respiratory virus we've seen. The chances of you getting infected depend on 2 factors: how much of the virus you're exposed to, but also the length of time that you're exposed to the virus. Because this one is so infectious, the maximum time for exposure is only 15 minutes. So it's not like you have to be around someone for days to get infected. You only have to be with someone who is shedding virus for 15 minutes. Think about that in terms of your worship service. Even if you've cut your worship service down to 30 minutes, you're still double the infectious time. So that's part of the insidious nature of this virus. This virus is not under control yet, even in the United States. The infection rate at the US is about 15 times what it is in any of the rest of the world. We do not have this under control even now. We're still at about 70,000, 66 to 70,000 new infections per day. That's about one new infection every 1.5 seconds. Right now in the US, we are at 1 in 10 to 11 infected across the country. And with certain spikes and variants in New York and California and Florida, those are all about 1 in 5. And so it is still running rampant, even if you're not looking at the variants. The medical consequences of this virus are incredible. I've never seen a virus like this. The fatality rate for this virus is actually fairly low. It's 1%. Ebola, Zika, SARS, all of those are about at 50%. So you can see the difference between the kind of viruses. The flu is at 0.1%. So this is 10 times more fatal than the flu, but it's still not a highly fatal virus. However, it's insidious for 2 reasons. First of all, 40% of those who are infected and shedding virus, so are infecting other people, are completely asymptomatic. So you don't know who you're sitting across and whether or not you're actually being exposed to virus. For those who will go on to develop symptoms, they can be asymptomatic and still infectious for up to 8 days before those symptoms emerge. So again, put yourself back into a worship setting. That could be 2 consecutive Sundays that people are shedding virus and they haven't gotten symptoms yet. Children are also huge vectors for community spread. There was a study that was done in August before the schools started to think about opening up last year in 3 different centers in the US. And it turns out that kids between the ages of 4 and 17 carry 25 times more virus in their nasal passages than a hospitalized adult. So because their immune systems respond differently, 99% of the time they will have no symptoms whatsoever, and yet they're that infectious. Really, a kid only gets a symptom, and it gets to be a serious symptom if they have an underlying medical condition. So they're a huge part of community spread, and that's important when we talk about herd immunity and vaccines as well. Right now, the World Health reports more than 117 million confirmed cases of COVID globally and more than 2.6 million reported deaths. Every country around the globe is involved. There is no one who has been exempt. In the US, we're almost at 30 million confirmed cases and over 533,000 deaths. That's more deaths than all of the US deaths from World War II, Vietnam, and Korea combined. It took us 4 months to get to 100,000 deaths. It took us 3 months each to get to 200 and 300,000 deaths. And it's accelerated so fast that it's only taken us 1 month each to get up to 400 and 500,000 deaths. The death rate is actually, it's declining, but it's still accelerating relative to the infections. Basically, a person dies from COVID about every 15 seconds globally. I want to talk about the medical consequences, and then we're going to go talk about the variants a little bit. So even though I said the fatality rate for this virus is low, the long-term medical consequences from this virus are almost unprecedented. For every 1 death, there are 19 hospitalizations. That's the reason that hospital utilization is such a big factor in determining what color you are in some of the sequences that county by county people are looking at the infectivity rate. For every 1 fatality, there are 18 permanent heart damage. Not only does the virus get into the cardiac tissue, but this virus is so infectious and it replicates so fast in the body that those who have underlying medical conditions, those who are going to get symptoms, actually produce a hyperimmune response. It's called a cytokine storm. Cytokine is the chemical that the immune cells release to keep more immune cells coming to attack the virus. What happens is it causes massive amounts of inflammation in the body. And that inflammation can do damage to organs. So part of the cardiac damage that you see is actually the body's response to the virus by mounting this immense inflammation response. For every 1 fatality, there are 10 permanent lung damages. I've seen CAT scans and MRIs from young cross-country female runners, some of the healthiest lungs you'll ever see, and they are permanently scarred. They will never get that kind of lung capacity back. For every 1 fatality, there are 3 permanent kidney damages. For every 1 fatality, there are 3 strokes. And part of the reason is that hyperimmune response and the inflammation also affects the microvasculature, the small blood vessels. And so it causes a clot, and that's what causes the strokes, even in young people. For every 1 fatality, there are 2 permanent neurological defects. The first cardinal symptom of a lot of COVID infection is loss of taste, loss of smell. That's a central nervous system effect, and they've shown that the virus actually gets into that part of the brain. But it also can progress to lack of ability to walk, and in 2 cases in the UK at least, psychosis. And so it can have some permanent neurological defects as well. There's also evidence that for every 1 death, there are 2 significant cognitive dysfunctions, and it's not really known yet whether that's permanent or not. But it's been shown that that's about a decrease of 9 IQ points. And that's that COVID brain fog that you hear about. So it's not a happy virus. It's not one that you want to get. The variants that have emerged, there are more than 4,000 identified. You have to think about this. The virus replicates in seconds as soon as it infects a cell. And that virus tends to replicate incompletely. So it's not every version of the mRNA that gets replicated is exactly like the one before. That means it's literally evolving by the minute. And that's what these variants are. They're basically small bits of evolution of this virus real time. Most of those 4,000 variants are less infectious than the original virus, and they will eventually die away. The ones that you hear about are opportunistically more infectious. And so they've actually taken over the original virus in terms of the amount of infectivity. The one in the UK is way more highly infectious, about 50% more infectious. It is also more virulent. It causes more severe disease, and it is proving to be slightly more fatal, particularly in younger, 25 to 45. It does, for the most part, appear to be covered by the current vaccinations, however. The one from South Africa, there are 2, again, more highly infectious. They've mutated. All of these mutations, by the way, are the protein spike on the outside of the virus. And that's also important as we talk about what to do with these and how the vaccines work with them. The South African variant, more infectious, more virulent, not necessarily more fatal. The UK variant is in 48 of our 50 states right now. The South African variant is in 15 states. The Brazilian variant is in 5 states. The Brazilian variant is the one that most people are concerned about. It's not completely clear how much of it is covered by the vaccines. We've been generating variants here in the United States as well. The spike in California and the spike in Colorado are from local variants. Those are also being exported. The one in California is in 8 different countries in 18 states right now. There are also variants that are arising in the Southwest. So in Arizona was one that I saw yesterday. The one from New York City actually is a unique set of variants on the protein spike. And scientists that I actually worked with at Columbia University said that actually it could threaten the efficacy of the vaccines, but they haven't really tested it completely full out yet. Coronaviruses actually mutate more slowly than the flu virus, which is a good thing, but because of its infectivity, we're seeing them far more quickly. So that's the fun part of the virus. I think the vaccines that are out there are 2 different types. Pfizer and Moderna are both based on the original mRNA genomic material that codes for part of the protein spike. So basically, this vaccine takes the original genetic material, just a piece of it, that doesn't cause disease, and that's what's injected. And that's why it takes a booster dose, because your body has to recognize it twice. What it does is it forces the cellular immune response of your body to recognize that protein as foreign, so that when the virus goes in with that same protein spike or something that's similar, then there's an antibody response that's mounted. And so you become immune to not to getting the virus, but to becoming sick from the virus. And so all of these vaccines, Moderna, Pfizer, and J&J, and the Janssen vaccine have all been shown to reduce serious symptoms as well as hospitalizations. That's the goal. The Janssen vaccine is a different type. It's basically a DNA snippet that codes for the protein spike, but that DNA snippet can't get into the cell on its own the way the mRNA can. So it's actually attached to a non-virulent vector, another virus, by the way. It's called an adenovirus. Adenovirus causes the common cold. The genetic material that causes the cold has been taken out of that virus and replaced with this little snippet of DNA. So it does the same thing. That virus attaches to a cell in your body, injects the DNA in. Your body recognizes just that snippet of DNA that doesn't cause disease as foreign, and then primes the cellular system to recognize it again when the actual virus comes in. Neither the mRNA or the DNA gets into your own DNA. It only gets into the cell and primes the immune system. It does not affect your DNA or your RNA at all. Neither do these vaccines affect fertility. That's a sort of an urban legend that's out there. It does not, and I've seen the data. The relative effectiveness of both of these, of all three of these viruses, is really, really high. And the beautiful part of it is it's high across age groups, which is not usual for a vaccine. Pfizer is approved under emergency use in the US for 16 and up, Moderna and Janssen for 18 and up. There are clinical trials right now for all three of those vaccines for 12 and up because they'd require a different dose. And then sometime toward the end of the year, they will also do clinical trials in 4 to 17. The World Health Organization has declared COVID-19 to be what's called an endemic virus, which means it will never go away. We are going to be dealing with COVID for the rest of our lives. And so the hope epidemiologically is that if we can get vaccines for 4 and above into 90 and above, the younger generation, the 1 to 3, will experience this as a minor cold. And that will keep the coronavirus in circulation, but the rest of the population will be immune. And so that's literally the epidemiologic construct behind the vaccination program. The problem with that, however, is that because for us to get to herd immunity, for us to really get to a place where the majority of our population is vaccinated, requires 70 to 90% of the entire population to have received the vaccine. Because we don't even have a vaccine for anybody below 16, that means more than 20% of our entire population isn't able to be vaccinated yet. And so for us to get to herd immunity, we're going to have to wait until we get vaccines for 12 and above, and probably for 4 and above as well. That means herd immunity is not going to come before the end of the year at the earliest, and it may not come until early next year. So if you've been watching the CDC most recent guidance, and this has been proving to be a source of confusion for a lot of people, CDC yesterday put out a notice that said, if you have been vaccinated with any of the vaccines and you're 2 weeks past that last vaccination, you can safely gather with a small group of family and a very small group of other people that you know without masking. The misinformation now is, hey, you don't need masks. Well, that's not what CDC said. What CDC said is when you're in public with unvaccinated people or in larger gatherings, and larger gatherings is generally thought of as more than 10, you need to be masked, still double masked, distanced, and if you can avoid those large gatherings, avoid the large gatherings. I told Robin before we started, I send out what I call love notes to my presbytery to tell them what's going on. And today's love notes was, what can I do after I've been vaccinated that's different? The answer is not much. So all of the same precautions that you've put in place, whether your church is back in person or not, will still be in place probably at least through fall. If you're doing virtual and your county is red or orange, depending on how you're looking at it, and I can give you some links to that, you should probably still consider really limiting anybody in the building and really sticking with virtual worship. Here in Ohio, Governor DeWine did us a favor. He gave us a 7-factor scientific and medical utilization factor color-coded system that all of our churches are using to determine whether or not they can go back into in-person worship safely. That in-person worship is still about 10 to 20% of the capacity of the sanctuary. It's pre-registration so that you know who's coming in and you don't get overloaded, particularly as we go into Easter season where you get a lot of walk-ins. And we did this a lot through Advent as well, although most of our churches were closed in December. Double masks required, or at least 1 mask required. Limiting all the things that get passed around so people aren't walking around the sanctuary. So collection plates and communion elements and bulletins are all left in the back of the sanctuary, and people pick up their own. So they're not being passed around. We've talked about not having blowing air in the sanctuary. And I've had lots of people say, but I have this awesome filter, or I have this UV thing. Well, that's great for about the first 30 seconds the air leaves that unit. But as soon as it goes over somebody who might be shedding viruses and infected, that air is infected as well. So what we've been telling people is, in the summer, if you've got air conditioning, in the winter, when you've got heat, pre-warm or pre-cool the sanctuary, and then turn off anything that blows it around while people are in the sanctuary. And then you could turn it back on after that. Singing is a particular problem. Singing is like a 4-minute sustained cough, and a cough travels at 50 miles an hour. So there are videos, and I actually sent the links to Robin and Ray. There are videos that show aerosolization from a singer going 24 to 30 feet. So 6 foot of distance without a mask is not sufficient. It's why choirs early on were shown to be super spreaders, because they're expelling so much air. The other things that we've been talking about are obviously social distance. So, mark off 6-foot sections in your sanctuary. Families can sit together, but you really should have everyone else distanced as much as you can. Right now, I had, at the beginning of the month, I had maybe about 10 of my 67 churches were open in a hybrid setting. So they had some virtual, they had some in person. In the next couple of weeks, more of my churches are starting to open, but they're opening with these very stringent restrictions. And as soon as we get a spike again, they will probably go back to close. And we've been telling sessions a couple of things. First of all, it's session who is responsible for making decisions about building utilization. And that includes all of the elements of what needs to be true to safely open on a reduced basis. Not only are they responsible for that decision, they're also then responsible for policing that decision. So if the decision, for example, insists on masks, then the session has to stand at the door while people are walking in, and they have to turn away anybody who refuses to wear a mask. That can't be the pastor's job. The pastor's got something else they've got to do. And so session has that responsibility. And once you start to work that with session and they understand the responsibility and the accountability they've got, then they actually do start to worry about what is the restriction that is appropriate for this population. So they do come up with some great things. And one of the documents I sent Robin and Ray was a decision tree. For Ohio, we have an internal system. Some states have their own internal systems for determining how effective the county is, or how few ICU beds might be there. But there are 2 other national databases that you can use, and you can search them county by county. One is called covidactnow.org, and I'll put that in the chat. It's great. It's got 5 of those same scientific medical utilization parameters. It's a great single source piece of data because it takes the emotion out of the data. So it's not about what the Catholic Church is doing across the street. It's here's what the data say, and you make the decision for your context and for what your church can do. The other database is actually the Center for Disease Control. They also have a county by county searchable 5-parameter color-coded system. And so what I've been telling people is pick one, because everybody posts their data a little bit differently. You can reconcile them at some point, but they're going to have different numbers and you'll drive yourself crazy trying to reconcile them. So pick one, they're all good, and then stick with the decision tree based on the infectivity rate and the overall color of your county. And then put together a decision tree about what needs to be true, what things need to be in place for people to safely come into your sanctuary for worship service. Those same requirements have to be there for anybody who comes in, not only for worship, but small groups, for any groups for whom you've rented your building. All of them have to have those same requirements in place. And so that's actually worked pretty well for us. As our churches have gotten to go back, and we've had pastors who've been exposed and congregants who have passed away because of COVID, but it really has been very, very minimal. And I'm pleased with the way that it has worked out. I've talked for too long. What questions do you have?
Do you have any questions?
I have one.
Good. I was going to say I stunned you all into silence otherwise.
I'm new to this. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
We have a setup when people come in and we do the temperatures and everything and screen them, and then they hand wash, pick up their bulletin. We're doing everything you said. But a couple of us are nurses, and you can't really ask parishioners if they're immunized.
Right.
I mean, we all kind of know who they are. And then they kind of ask me to talk to them, and I'm like, oh boy. Any comments on that? I mean,
the most important thing to remember is, and actually I just had a session meeting last night where the first question was, so who in our congregation is vaccinated? And my answer was, that's irrelevant, because you can still carry the virus if you're vaccinated. You can still infect other people if you're vaccinated. You can still be infected by a variant and get sick if you're vaccinated. We haven't proven that out yet. And it's unlikely that there would be a church who would say only vaccinated people can come. That's not our mission. And if there are unvaccinated people there, you really still need to stay masked per CDC guidance. Anybody over 10 people, and I would say honestly, anybody over 5 or 6, you really should be masked anyway. And again, that's consistent with CDC guidance at this point. So as much as people want to think about this vaccine as a magic cape, that as soon as the needle touches your arm, you're good to go and masks are not required anymore, that couldn't be further from the truth. And so what we've been telling the congregations here is normal is, first of all, we shouldn't be going back to normal, because normal really wasn't working for us anyway. Normal kept closing our churches, and normal is really nostalgia. And nostalgia is not a great way to build a kingdom. So first of all, take the time to see what you've learned and take that forward. But also, normal isn't going to happen. Normal without masks and singing and choirs and everybody having an hour-long meal-induced fellowship afterwards, that's not going to happen until next year at the earliest. We're in this for a while. Did that help?
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
Sad, but thank you.
I know.
Lilia, I see your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. Can you repeat, please, the date when the vaccine for kids who are 16 or younger will be ready?
It's a good question. I don't have a specific date. The companies are testing right now 12 and above, because they actually have to step the dosage down by body weight. That's why these trials get chunked differently. And so what the projections I've seen said there will be likely data available for FDA to review for 12 and above by the end of the year. So close to Thanksgiving, Christmas time. The trials for 4 to 11 largely have not started yet. They're in development. So I would expect those to start sometime later this year, particularly if we've got some early data that says what the dose is for 12 to 16. And then that data should be available and ready for approval for FDA in early of 2022. It's possible that could be accelerated, but it's not. Those are the dates that I'm aware of right now.
Thank you.
You are more than welcome. Yes, ma'am.
I've read some things recently, kind of downplaying the need for fear with regard to touched surfaces. Have you seen anything with regard to that? Have they been able to determine whether or not there is a significant danger of spread from surfaces?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, again, this virus has only been around literally for a year. It was exactly a year ago today that we shut the nation down. And so early guidance on that was different than what we've learned in the meantime. The virus is primarily spread by aerosolization, by breathing it in. That's why the masks work. But it does last for some period of time on surfaces. It lasts about 3 to 4 days on an impermeable surface, like a light switch or a doorknob or the back of a pew, and about 1 to 2 days on a permeable surface, like a bulletin or a hymnal. And so I've had questions about, if I'm back in the sanctuary with all of my precautions and nobody's going to go back in there until the very next Sunday, so I've got 7 days of nobody in the room, do I really have to go crazy sanitizing everything? And the answer is probably not. But if there are surfaces that are touched frequently, then I would make sure those are cleaned. One of the things that we've done in one of the bigger churches in my presbytery is they are back to 1/10 capacity in-person worship plus their live streaming. But the problem is, if they're there for 40 minutes, somebody's going to want to use the restroom. And so what they've done is they've marked off 6 feet on the hallways that lead to the restrooms so that they've got people socially distanced at all times. Only one person at a time is allowed in the restroom, and in there are alcohol wipes. And so the person that goes in wipes down anything they've touched, and then they come out, and then the next person goes in, and then they wipe down anything they've touched. And that's, I mean, that's probably best practice at this point.
Okay. And I'm sorry, just to follow up, where can we get the 7-step scientific list that you referred to earlier?
Oh, so the seven parameters that make up the color-coded system is the Ohio system, but I did put the covidactnow.org website in the chat. The other one is cdc.org, and so I'll do that. Both of those have searchable databases that will show you what 5 of those 7 parameters are for your county, and it'll give you a color-coded system. I think it's red, orange, yellow, green for both of them. And so red and orange are either a high infection spread or a high death rate, or a high hospital bed utilization. So there's limited medical capacity. And you really sort of have to look at those 5 things, because depending on where your church is, it could be any one of those parameters that tips you into those high categories. If you're in an urban setting, you're going to have lots and lots of hospital beds, and it's unlikely that will tip you to red. But if you're in a rural setting and you've only got 2 in the county hospital, you can be red in a heartbeat because there aren't that many beds available. So it really depends on what the issue is that causes you to go to those high levels. But both of the websites are in the chat.
I have one.
Yes,
more.
ma'am.
I'm getting beat up at church about singing really badly.
Yes, ma'am.
And I've talked to other ministers from other churches, and they're like, well, we're humming quietly and we're doing this. We tried humming quietly last week at church, or singing quietly. It didn't
work.
So you know what? I would appreciate a yes or a no. So I have somebody to back me up this week for my worship committee, because I'm saying no. I don't think it should be singing.
So I do have a couple of churches that are singing with masks, and that's better than nothing. And actually, one of the videos I sent Robin shows that a good mask can really stop a lot of the aerosolizations. Nothing's perfect. I mean, nothing that I tell you is going to eliminate risk. All you can do is reduce it. The best double mask you can make is a thick fabric mask that has inserted into it, get this, a cutout piece of a vacuum cleaner bag. Those things are amazing. I mean, they're designed to stop small particles. So that's a really good double mask, and that way you don't have 2 things behind your ears. I would absolutely, if I were queen, I would absolutely forbid singing without a mask in any way, shape, or form. I will tell you, one of my churches did it in a way that touched me. And you'd have to have some of what they had. They have screens. It's an older congregation, but they do have screens so that they can project, so that people can see the words for a liturgy or for anything. What they've decided to do is have the pianist play the hymn, and they just project the words. And it's a beautifully meditative way to experience the hymn, because everybody knows, especially if it's a classic hymn, everybody knows the song, they know the words, they're singing it in their head, but it's a quiet moment. And it was really beautiful. It was beautifully done. I'd never seen anybody do it that way, but I really enjoyed that.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome. You can always blame me. Everybody else does. It's cool.
What church are you with? I've not met you.
I'm sorry. I'm Jan Bernhagen from Westminster in Fairfield Glade.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah, Becky couldn't make it, and I'm glad I could.
Good. That's great.
Yeah, the downside of starting your job in the middle of a pandemic is you don't always meet everybody right away, right? I know. It's true.
I have a question here someone sent me. My church has been in person since May with many precautions. I've recently begun to get serious pushback about wearing masks in church and in general, this community has not taken virus precautions very seriously. I'm trying to do my best to help keep them safe without getting myself into a battle that I can't win. Do you have advice about which precautions to prioritize in this kind of setting?
Yeah, mask is number one. Because this virus is spread through the air, through breathing. If you look at hospital workers, and I've had this question before, are the plexiglass shields okay? Well, they're great if somebody's spitting on you. And of course, if somebody's spitting on you, you probably should find another job anyway. But they won't stop you from breathing the air because the air comes in from underneath. So masks are number one. Social distancing and no hugging would be number two. I mean, those are my top two. Everything else, the touching, the passing, I mean, when you're passing things around, you're bringing people close together. So you're no longer social distancing. That's why that one's there. It's really not so much the transfer from a touch as much it is as the bringing together of people. But masks are a must. And frankly, the way to address that is to say that is still as much as any of us can mandate anything, that is still a requirement under CDC guidance. Yeah. Now, Texas is ignoring that. So, I mean, it's hard to say that that's a requirement. And I understand the nastiness of that battle.
Yeah, and also for those folks who have been vaccinated, once again, what I keep hearing is you're wearing your mask to protect others because even though you're vaccinated, you still could be carrying the virus, right?
Correct. That's correct.
We're trying to protect others around us and in our congregation.
Right. And, again, remember all of those numbers I gave you. Even if you have been vaccinated, you can still get the variant and you can still shed that, and you won't necessarily know it because people will still be asymptomatic or pre-symptomatic. So, I mean, we only have 17% of the country in various pockets vaccinated at this point. We're nowhere near herd immunity. We are nowhere near ready to take masks off. And I can tell you the epidemiologic community is reeling in horror at what Texas has done. It is just way, way too early for that.
Yeah. When do you see that happening? When your guesstimation? End of sometime next year?
Yeah, I mean, to really, really get to herd immunity, I think sometime next year. The good news is I see more and more adults. Originally, when the vaccines were even being talked about, there were about 60% of Americans saying, I'm not getting that vaccine, it's too early. Well, last month we were down to 30% of Americans saying no way. And there's always going to be a cadre of people who will never take a vaccine or medically can't. But that number keeps reducing. Now people are saying, okay, I'm going to get the vaccine. And I do think one of the things to keep in mind is because there are variants for this, because it does evolve, because it is so highly infectious, it is very likely this is going to be an annual shot, just like the flu. I think because of the vaccine companies are now making boosters against the variants, and the native immunity, when COVID first really hit, as we started to measure how long the antibodies lasted, it didn't last very long. I mean, people were still getting symptoms and still shedding virus months after they'd been infected. So the immune response, the native immune response, is not very strong. The immune response to the vaccine is much stronger, but because we're still early in this game, we really don't know how long that vaccine will protect us for. So that's the other reason to keep wearing masks, because we're not sure what the immunity is going to do in terms of longevity. So it's very likely this is going to be an annual shot. It's also very likely that for some period of time, we will be carrying vaccination cards. And that's not without precedent. If you go to Africa, I run the board of a Christian nonprofit in Kenya. You can't go between countries in Africa unless you can show proof of yellow fever vaccination. And so the airline industry right now is debating whether or not they are going to require proof of vaccination before they will let you travel. And so that also meets with a lot of, oh my gosh, you're taking away my civil rights. But it is probably going to be a precondition for us to move around the country and around the globe for a little while. And again, remember herd immunity, because we are such a mobile society. Herd immunity really should be global before we do too much travel. I'm missing my international friends, believe me, but it's going to be a while before I go anywhere.
Yeah. Lily, I see your hand up.
Yes, I have two questions. One, it is your recommendations now that the weather is getting better, warm. What would be your recommendation to have worship outside or not, what kind of measures we can have. And then the other question is about a myth, or I don't know if it's true, that if we get one of the cloth masks and we put water and then salt and let it dry on air by air, the salt may have to have a similar effect to the vacuum bags that you were saying. So I don't know if you have any information about that too.
Okay, so I'll start with the outdoor one. And I'm just going to confess, I haven't heard the saltwater one, but it's intriguing. I'll look that one up and I'll send Robin an answer and see if I can find something on that. I love outdoor worship. What a wonderful way to witness to your neighbors. And so we did a lot of outdoor worship last summer. We're still socially distanced. I think that's where you start. So people are in a circle, they're 6 feet apart. Every church that did outside worship did it that way last year. Masks are best if you've got, so I'll even go back into the sanctuary. And then I'll come back to outside worship. So I'm actually answering your question. If you can open windows, if you can get fresh air ventilated, blowing through the sanctuary, that's a good thing because it's removing virus. Even if it's blowing over someone who's infected, it will only blow it in one direction. Most of our churches don't have windows that open. That's the problem. And that's why we say shut off anything that's blowing if you don't have fresh air ventilation. There was a study that came out of Wuhan right after the virus emerged that is a perfect metaphor for a smaller sanctuary that's closed with blowing air. It was a restaurant. There was one individual who was infected, and CDC actually went and mapped all of the people around him that got infected because the air conditioner was blowing around him. And so that's the reason for the advice, don't have blowing air in your sanctuary. But fresh air ventilation is great because it takes the virus in one direction. I've seen some of my churches, when they did go outside, when they wanted to sing, so this goes back to the singing question, they actually turned and faced out of their circle. So they were singing away from each other, and then they could do that. But if you can get them masked and keep them masked, if you can, and certainly keep them distanced, outdoor worship is wonderful.
Others, anything else bubbling up?
I have stunned them into silence. Well, Robin and Ray know how to get a hold of me. So if questions emerge or come from somebody who's seen the recording later, feel free to send them. I'm more than happy to go look up and answer if I don't know it, or send documentation. I know I will send Robin the one other document that came out today about what does it mean to go back with vaccinations. So you have that, but then otherwise, I think you pretty much got everything that I can offer. And if there's something else, then let me know, by all means.
Looks like we got one. Could we require church staff to be vaccinated?
Wow, that's a tough one.
Yeah.
You know, as presbyter, I say I have all of the accountability and absolutely no authority. I can't mandate anything, even as an immunologist. You know, mandating any kind of vaccination gets tough. I think what you can mandate is as the vaccinations expand, if a staff member or an elder for that matter has refused to get vaccinated, that you can insist that they can only attend on Zoom or will have to work from home. I mean, I think, you know, the laws of employment in your state are going to be in effect for some of that, but you have the right to say, I'm not willing to have you put other people at risk, and sort of make some concession to that. But I would definitely look at the employment law where you are.
Mm. Paul, did you have a question?
Yes, and I may have misunderstood or misheard. She may have already addressed this, but did you say that during outdoor services, I'm assuming if people are wearing masks in outdoor services, they still can't sing? Would that be correct? A correct assumption?
Well, so there are places where people have allowed singing with masks. It's really up to what your session is going to permit. Singing with masks is better than singing with no masks. No singing at all is best, but that's hard. I mean, that's part of the worship experience. So Outdoors, if you can socially distance and keep them masked and you turn them away from each other to sing, I think that's about the best that you're probably going to be able to do. But the masks do help. They do.
Thank you.
Of course.
Will you recommend to limit the worship time to 15 minutes? Like you were saying, you know, indoors or outdoors, it will be the same amount of time, I imagine, to get infected, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you're taking all those other precautions, if you're socially distancing more than 6 feet or 6 feet, if you're masked, you know, I think the amount of time has less of a factor because 15 minutes is 15 minutes of just viral assault at that point. Originally, CDC said it had to be 15 contiguous minutes. Afterwards, they came back and said it's 15 cumulative minutes. So you can get 5 minutes here and 2 minutes there and 3 minutes there. And it's just a matter of how much virus you're exposed to. Most of the churches that I have are at 30 minutes if they're back in place. I have a couple who are doing a full hour service, but they are really socially distanced. I mean, these are big sanctuaries with very few people in them, or little tiny sanctuaries where there are 2 families in the church and one's in that corner and one's in the back corner. So I've got a little bit of everything. But I think, you know, limiting it to 15 minutes is probably extreme. If you're back together in a sanctuary, keeping it to about 30 minutes is maybe good. It's better. It's just less exposure, particularly if you're also doing all those other things. But I've got churches who are back to a full hour. I know there are so many moving parts to this and so much emotion wrapped up in it. It's hard. It really is hard. And as we now go into the end of Lent and, you know, the beginning of Holy Week and Palm Sunday, it becomes even more difficult. So it really is a matter of just taking the best precautions you can to reduce the risk the most that you can.
Yeah. So there's other documents that you sent that we didn't send out with a reminder, but we'll get the rest of the documents that Lisa sent to us. Oh, what happened?
It's a pretty picture.
Sharing their screen.
I did something, I goofed up.
Oh, that's okay.
All right, I like the picture.
Yeah.
Let me get my husband.
That's okay. She's just reminding us that we all want to be outside.
There.
There you go.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure. That's fine. So I was just going to say, we'll get the rest of that information to you all, the information that Lisa sent us as well. So if there's not anything else, we'll let you return to your very busy schedule. And thank you Lisa, again. Thank you so much. We just appreciate your time and your knowledge and your gifts. Yeah.
Of course, I'm happy to. Yeah. Any other questions? By all means, let me know. I'm happy to answer them. You guys be blessed.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.